Put that coffee down.
I'm not here to waste your time, okay? I certainly hope you're not here to waste mine. So I'm gonna keep this short.
Helen, we're both in sales. Let me tell you why I suck as a salesman.
Most valuable commodity I know of is information. Wouldn't you agree?
Coffee's for closers only.
Hey there, friend. Welcome back to the Behind Your Back podcast with me, Bradley Hartmann. This podcast talks about leadership, personal productivity, time management, and the craft of selling in the construction industry. This episode is brought to you by Boise Cascade Engineered Wood Products and our friends at Materials Exchange. So before we jump into these 7 book recommendations that I'm offering up here, and we got a little bit of everything. So my hope is, depending on what you're thinking about this summer, what you want to dive into, how you want to improve your own education through reading, hopefully either for yourself or someone you know on your team or in your personal lives, we've got a little something for everyone. But before we jump into that, I want to share this concept that I believe is really powerful, and especially during these COVID times, it's one that I went all in on, and it's this idea of an anti-library. Yes, an anti-library. And this was first coined by the author Nassim Nicholas Taleb, which you may recognize. He wrote the book Black Swan. He wrote Anti-Fragile, which is one of my favorites. It's more of a reference book. It's pretty dense. It's not a super easy read, but I firmly believe there are some really important big ideas that can change lives in there. They've changed my life. So he talks about an anti-library, and an anti-library in Taleb's saying it's a collection of books we own, but we have never read. And he argues that a collection of unread books has more value than shelves of read books. So I have taken the liberty to do just this. And I kind of take the mindset, if I hear of a book or someone who I admire recommends a book, I really don't think about it. I just buy it. And that does mean I am often receiving books from Amazon, and I get them and they go on my shelf for a while, and it might be a week or two. And in some cases, surely looking around me right now, I've got ones that have been here for over a year. But this mindset of having a library of books that are available to us on demand, and inevitably, I will be thinking about a topic, I will be struggling with something for a client or something that I'm trying to think through, and I see a book that I already own that I have not read, and I dig into it. So I would strongly encourage you to think about an anti-library. And I think a lot of folks struggle with this because any of the books that they have, they feel like they have to buy them and read them immediately. Kind of changes your relationships with books. So as we dive in, think about this idea of an anti-library. Actually, I lied. There's one more thing beyond the anti-library. It is a scoring system. I tend to be overly analytical about things like this. And I thought, if I'm going to be making recommendations, what is my thinking that supports this? So I have developed what I call the Parole Book Score. That's right, Parole, and that is an acronym, and it stands for persuasion. And these are weighted. I don't want to go too far into this because it will not be good listening if I start to explain the distribution of weight that I've applied to each one of these. But number one, is it persuasive? I want to know, is it applicable and is it relevant to my daily life? When I think of these books now, my goal is to understand how they can improve my life and how I can apply them immediately. And if I can't, well, the overall value of it goes down. So the P is for persuasion. The A and the R are for application and relevance. Objectivity of the author. The length is very important for me. My belief is that all other things being equal, a shorter book is better than a longer book. And most books could probably be edited a little bit shorter, and that certainly goes for several of the books that I have written. Entertainment, do I enjoy reading it? And then I just kind of have a 1 point or 5 point score for did I finish it? And over the years, I have gotten much better at identifying books that annoy me and just chucking it off to the side and moving on because, hey, life is short. So if you're interested in that, feel free to dig into the show notes. I will have a link to the scores that I have for these 7 books and an explanation for why I gave them those scores. So if you're interested, you can check more about my Parole book scoring. So here we go. We're going to dive right in. The first book that I would strongly recommend to a friend is the book titled Designing Products That People Love. It is written by Scott Herf, and this got on my radar because we hired a user experience and user interface coach. We are developing our first piece of web application I'm very excited about. More to come on that in the future, undoubtedly. But got into a space where I have no idea what we're doing. I have no idea what I know. I have no idea what I don't know. So the first step was hiring a coach. And then I said to the coach, hey, what should I be reading? And she recommended 2 books, bought them both, read them both. And this one really stood out. Here's what I would tell you. It's 282 pages. It's got lots of images. It has lots of examples, lots of interviews, lots of question and answers. They give you a lot of context about the kind of the history of design, which I found fascinating. And in theory, this book is for online content. I found this to be immensely insightful as I think about all processes with our own team, very analog processes as well. It's just about how we can make it easier by making some architectural choices on how people navigate through anything online or off. So again, first book I'd strongly recommend to a friend is Designing Products People Love by Scott Herf. Book number 2 is The 4 Disciplines of Execution. It is by Chris McChesney, Sean Covey, and Jim Hewling. So I had never heard of this book. It's been out for, I think, since 2012, so almost a decade. And apparently a lot of people know about this. It just came on my radar. And when I hear of clients or smart friends of mine refer to a process or a book that they are reading and they're getting value from it, I immediately buy it. And that's what happened here. I had 2 clients mention this book in the same week. So I bought it and I couldn't put it down. I pounded through it. I really enjoyed it. It's 322 pages, but there are lots of graphics, lots of details. On a rating of 1 to 5, in terms of applicability and relevance and my ability to implement it, it was a 5. I've already started applying it immediately within our own team. I bought copies for our team and they're reading it now. And I immediately started applying some of these principles to the clients that we're working with. And ultimately, they recommend 4 things on what to do and then break down how to do it and build a system around it. Number 1 is focus on goals. No shocker there. Number 2 is act on lead measures instead of lagging measures. And going into this, I think, is a core challenge for lots of individuals who are trying to do great things. Number 3, how do you keep a compelling scoreboard, which I firmly agree with. And the last one is how do you create a cadence of accountability? That phrase, cadence of accountability, is one that I love. And within our own team and with some clients, that's what we struggle with on how do you keep the momentum going? How do you continue a cadence of accountability? This book helps you really do all that. Again, it is The 4 Disciplines of Execution by Chris McChesney, Sean Covey, and Jim Hewling. The next book I'd recommend is called The Box by Mark Levinson. And when I start talking about this, you're immediately going to roll your eyes and think, I should probably shut this podcast off right now. Do not do that. Do not do that. I will say this. I am absolutely fascinated by and a student of containerization. Yes, the container, which has driven global shipping and Amazon and the history of this thing, I just find absolutely fascinating. I got turned onto it by a podcast called, aptly, Containers, which is 8 episodes, and they're about 30 to 40 minutes. And it kind of gives the history, and they tell a really nice story about the history of the shipping container, the humble shipping container, which is now everywhere, and how, whether it's rail, whether it's trucking, obviously by boat, how the shipping container came about, I find fascinating. And that's what this book is all about. And I would consider this. If you are thinking about getting your MBA, I would say find someone really smart who already has their MBA, someone you trust and you think is really intelligent when it comes to business, and pick up this book and go chapter by chapter. It's a little bit long. It is 389 pages, but I believe this is an MBA in a book. It has sales, it has marketing, it has finance, leadership, management, accounting, entrepreneurship, innovation. This book I found absolutely fascinating. I couldn't put it down. And of all the books that I've read over the past, 12 to 18 months, I do not believe that I've highlighted one more often than this book. Again, it's called The Box, How the Shipping Container Made the World Smaller and the World Economy Bigger. If you want to understand how our world works now and why Amazon is so successful, well, it's stepping on the shoulders of the history of the container. And this book, The Box, explains it all. I absolutely love this book. There's one character in here that I will highlight in my upcoming book called Yes, Fear Works, But There's a Better Way, about being a great coach and a great leader. Malcolm McLean, who came from the trucking industry and ultimately was one of the main drivers behind containerization. He's a fascinating character, and I really enjoyed learning more about him. There's so many insights in here. And if you think back before containers, shipping and handling used to cost upwards of 25% of the total cost of the product. And in a related note, longshoremen and the unions that controlled the ports, there was, in the Pacific coast, 1,399 work stoppages from the unions in 14 years. So that is one work stoppage for every 6 weeks over 14 years. So if you don't think that's enough incentive for people to rethink how we do things, it's just absolutely fascinating. And it also really depicts the positive and the negative implications of having the government involved. So in some cases, the government set up this boom and bust cycle we have in shipping, which we are in boom times right now. Busts will surely follow, but also how we would never have the regulation and the standardization that is required for all countries across the world in trucking, in rail, by boat, that were required to make containerization successful. So anyway, I could ramble on about this book, The Box, but I won't. I'd highly recommend it to a friend. The Box, How the Shipping Container Made the World Smaller and the World Economy Bigger. Next book, I found this book absolutely hilarious for a number of reasons. It is John H. Patterson, Pioneer in Industrial Welfare. It is by the author Samuel Crowther. It came out in 1926. It is 364 pages. If you have not heard of John H. Patterson, he's the founder of National Cash Register. He's the one who made cash registers ubiquitous. This guy was eccentric, very Steve Jobs-like, but about 130 years before. He was the first guy to start a school for training production workers as well as salespeople. He invented this idea of sales territories, paying people on commissions. And this is in the late 19th century. Just a fascinating guy, but also eccentric. He made, for a while, all his executives come in at 5 in the morning, ride horses. Then they had to get massages in a very specific way. And then they had to bathe in a very specific way. He made all his executives do this. At one point, 1/6 of the 100 largest companies in the United States had all previously worked for NCR, National Cash Register. So he had a machine for developing strong men, but also as soon as he was fearful that these individuals, one of the original founders of IBM, for example, became too powerful, he immediately fired them. So I'm also doing research on John H. Patterson for my book, Yes, Fear Works, and he is an absolutely fascinating character. This book has absolutely zero objectivity. This is an entire puff piece about him. And if you read more about John H. Patterson, you realize that in addition to having a sales department, he had a competition department, which were successful salespeople, and their job was to destroy the competition and maintain their monopoly from doing everything from lighting their competitors' plants on fire or pouring sand in the competitors' cash machines when the operators at the local stores weren't paying attention. So unbelievable character. I've so much enjoyed, and I can't wait to continue to write about him and share more information on him. But this book is John H. Patterson, Pioneer in Industrial Welfare. Next book here, terrible title, really good book. It's called Immortal Magyar. That's right, Immortal Magyar. Now, you probably know what immortal means. Magyar, what the hell is that? Yeah, I had to look it up too. That is someone from the country of Hungary. So Immortal Hungarian, also a bad title, but different. This book came out in 1950. It's relatively short, 206 pages, by a Dr. Frank Slaughter. So the subtitle of this book is Semmelweis, Conqueror of Childbed Fever. So he was a doctor, Ignaz Semmelweis, as you know. He's from Hungary. He was the first guy. This is prior to germ theory, when Louis Pasteur understood really what bacteria was. Ignaz Semmelweis was the first guy to understand that when we don't wash our hands and we go from, I don't know, hypothetically cutting open cadavers or performing surgeries on one person, and we don't wash our hands, we don't change our clothes, we use no disinfectants, and we immediately go over and then perform another surgery on someone else who is giving labor, bad things happen. So quick context here, throughout history, if babies were born breech, bad things happen. It was not uncommon for either the mother and or the child to pass away if the baby was coming out without their head first. So The forceps were introduced as a tool to help change the positioning of the baby, and that greatly helped. And there were some other advances. Now, what they hadn't learned was when we use forceps and we don't clean them, or we have doctors that go from cadavers or from patient 1 to patient 2 to patient 3, and we don't wash our hands, bad things happen. And the mortality rate in the mid-19th century or so, when we introduced forceps to deliver babies, was as high as 20 or 25%. So 1 out of 4 or 1 out of 5 mothers and or their babies would die during delivery. And Ignaz Semmelweis, the Hungarian, came along and he did not understand why, but he knew whether or not we washed our hands, that this individual had a greater likelihood of dying. So he introduced these measures, and immediately when he took over the hospital, the mortality rate was 18%. Within 90 days, it was down to under 1%. This happened over and over and over again. And yet, his practices and his policies were not only not adopted, but he was shunned from the medical community. So it's just a fascinating look at technological advances, the power of likability, and this age-old idea that if you have a good idea, not only will people not just pick it up and run with it immediately, you're going to have to pound them over the head with it. And this guy took incredibly detailed stats, yet was unable to, quote unquote, sell his idea. So a lot more to come on this. And again, this is part of a research. I'm about 3 books deep on Semmelweis and his advances in childbed fever. And literally, he saved millions and millions of lives, and yet was shunned from the community and ultimately died before he got any of this recognition. It's a fascinating look. So this book is Immortal Magyar. Terrible title, really good book. Second to last book here is The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying by Bronnie Ware. It's 300 pages. And as you can tell from the title, not a real pick-me-up. So is this book entertaining? Well, no, not really. Not super entertaining. But here's what I will say is when we think about this, when we think about death and the regrets that we would have on our deathbed, to me, this is kind of like the answers to the test. And when my wife, about 4 years ago or so, was diagnosed with breast cancer, it was extremely aggressive. It, as you can imagine, flipped my life upside down and really changed the way that I think about death and plan for these things, and for better or worse, talk about these things, with myself and my kids and friends. And when I heard about this book, it really lit a fuse for me, and I wanted to learn more. So this book makes me emotional. However, I find it fascinating. So if you're curious, here are the top 5 regrets. Regret number 1, I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. Ooh, that's a big one. Regret number 2, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. Yeah, if you're listening to this, you're probably guilty of that. Regret number 3, I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. That's heavy. Regret number 4, I wish I'd stayed in touch with my friends. Absolutely. And regret number 5, I wish I had let myself be happier. So, is this entertaining? I don't know, but I think this is an incredibly important book and has really kind of reinforced some of the most important things away from work and some of the ambitions and goals that I have there to how do we make sure we're living for the moment, taking advantage of everything we can right now. At the end of the day, being happy in the present moment, not caught up in the past or thinking too much about the future. Top 5 Regrets of the Dying by Bronnie Ware. And last but not least is the book, A Calendar of Wisdom by one of the greatest authors of all time, Leo Tolstoy. The subtitle is Daily Thoughts to Nourish the Soul, written and selected from the world's sacred texts. So I have a very specific morning routine. I'm not going to take you through all of it because you wouldn't care, but there are 2 books that I read every single day, and one of them is The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday, and the other one is The Daily Drucker by Peter Drucker. And I'm a big fan of just reading 1 page per day, starting off the day, trying to think intelligently or think differently, challenge your thoughts about how we're going to approach the day. And I've often considered how I might be able to incorporate the Bible into kind of daily reading. Never really found anything that really fit. And this book, A Calendar of Wisdom, was recommended to me, and it kind of checked off a couple different things. Number 1, I've never read any Tolstoy, so I guess I can make myself feel smarter by at least reading a little bit of what he has. Number 2, he incorporates almost daily part of the Bible in here, and they're on specific themes, and there's either 5 or 6 very short. Some are, only, 5 or 6 words. Other ones, you have a really small paragraph, but it's 1 page per day, meant to be read throughout the year. And it incorporates text from the Quran, the Talmud, the Bible, lots of apparently brilliant people. I've been looking up certain names like Blaine Pascal. Like, did I learn about that ever? I don't know. But anyway, it's a really nice, quick read, fit right into kind of my daily reading habits, and I would highly recommend it to a friend. So it's called A Calendar of Wisdom by Leo Tolstoy. So again, there are the 7 books that I would recommend to you this quarter. I've gotten a lot of value from each and every one of them. Again, in the show notes, you're going to see a link to see our parole score, so you can see exactly how I scored these on persuasion, applicability and relevance, objectivity, the length of the book, the entertainment, and whether or not I finished it. And for all of these books, I finished all of them. I would strongly recommend all of them to a friend, depending, of course, on your own individual context and what you're looking to learn about. Quick recap. These are Designing Products People Love by Scott Herf, The 4 Disciplines of Execution, The Box, History of the Container by Mark Levinson, John H. Patterson. This dude's a character, I'm telling you. Pioneer in Industrial Welfare, Immortal Magyar about Ignaz Semmelweis, the Conqueror of Childbed Fever. It's a rough title, rough subtitle, the whole thing. But I'm telling you, this guy's fantastic. I'm excited to write more about him and share more insights about him. The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying by Bronnie Ware, and A Calendar of Wisdom, a daily reader by none other than the legendary Leo Tolstoy. So that's all we've got. Again, think about this idea of an anti-library. If any of these books seem like they might resonate now or in the future, don't think about it. Just buy it. Put it on your shelf. Keep it around. Make it available to you. When is the last time you bought a book and thought, you know what one of my biggest regrets are this month? Can't believe I spent $13.75 on that book. No, never done that. And of all the things I look back and said, you know what? Probably not a great use of my capital that I worked hard for. I don't think I've ever said that about any book that I bought. So think about this idea of the anti-library. Don't be ashamed about having a bunch of books available to you that you have not read. And to that point, I'll just throw this in there because I'm staring at it right now. This idea of an anti-library came from Anti-Fragile, the book by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. And the subtitle there is Things That Gain from Disorder. And this idea about how when the world breaks down and people freak out and things break, how you can set yourself up to profit from those and plan for them, I found fascinating and have certainly applied that to my life, or have tried to. So that's all we've got. As always, thank you for listening. I know you got different places to put your time and attention. I hope one or more of these books can help you. And I will tell you, if you have a book that has changed your life, I would love to hear from you. In the future, I plan to post these episodes roughly once a quarter with hopefully books I continued to read that have impacted my life. So as always, we're going to close out with our leadership mantra. You, my friend, are owed nothing. Deliver value first.